We really didn't have much turnover at all. Maybe 4 or 5 people a year out of 400. It was very low. So anyway, that was the confidence I had, and I really didn't honestly know anything about a 401k or how all that worked, but I did know enough to where there was no internet, not really back then. I didn't have a computer or anything.
This is Dana Samuelson with the American Gold Exchange. You're listening to the Average Joe Finances Podcast with Mike Cavagioni.
If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you smash the like and subscribe buttons. If you're listening to our podcast, go leave us a 5-star review. All of our links can be found in the video description or show notes below. Hey, welcome back to the Average Joe Finances Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Cavagioni, and today's guest is another Mike. It's Mike Tarno. So, Mike, super excited to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me today and being here.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, you got a great podcast. I love the information you share. So.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Speaking of great podcasts, I know you also have your own too, so we're going to get to that a little bit later. But I would like to start this off the same way I start every podcast episode, and that is introducing you so my guests can know a little bit more about you and who you are and your story. So if you could share with us a little bit about yourself, who is Mike Tarno?
Boy, I could go on for hours, actually, because I love talking about myself. No, I'm originally from Southwest Florida, a small town, probably halfway between Sarasota and Fort Myers, if you're familiar with Florida. Son of a World War II veteran, Korean War veteran, police officer, the whole thing. So I grew up very straight-laced and a little bit of a dork, which turned out to be an advantage later on. I joined the Air Force when I was 19. I served 4 years. I was at Pope Air Force Base in North Carolina. I learned how to repair radios and radar equipment, all air traffic control equipment, ring down lines, which they don't have those anymore, but phone equipment was switching. We had a switching room that was as big as a bedroom, and so I learned all that stuff, and I got out and I started fixing copiers for a living. So I drove around and fixed copiers. I did that for about 5.5 years. And then I ended up working as a forklift driver for Anheuser-Busch, and I did that for 25 years. And then I finally had enough, and there was an opportunity to kind of work for myself. And they always say that if you want to work for an idiot, go ahead and work for yourself. And I just decided it was a good time for us. My wife had already retired. She was a teacher. And so things have been going well for us. We got married in 1989. She's the love of my life. My son and his wife just gave us twin granddaughters, identical twin granddaughters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Shout out to Eleanor and Rosemary. Yeah.
Awesome.
They are 9 weeks old.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Congratulations, Grandpa.
Yeah.
That's
no,
great.
I'm a little late in life. I'm 59. Normally you get that a little bit early, but it's okay. I have the time to enjoy it now. That's why I'm looking at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Fantastic. So you joined the Air Force at 19. Thank you for your service. I appreciate that. It is a calling that not a lot of people get into. Not a lot of people do. It's less than 1% of Americans have served in the military. I appreciate that. Yeah. So then you got out and you started working on copiers, right? So you did that for 5 years before you became a forklift operator for 25 years for Anheuser-Busch. 25 years in a career field is huge. I know that one of the things we're going to be talking about today is how you got yourself to the point where you were able to retire at the age of 55, right? So I'd like to get into that a little bit and talk about what you did to get there. And so the first question I want to ask you is, as you were in this career field, how did you know what you needed to do to get to the point where you can retire at 55? Like most people retire at 65, right? So how did you get there 10 years earlier?
They gave us a lot of information when I first started working there. And this was, Anheuser-Busch had just opened this brewery in 93. I started there in 94. It was their phase 2 of the opening. And they had and this is a specific situation you're probably not going to find very often, especially nowadays, but they had this retirement plan that if you worked 10 years, you were 10 years vested and you were 55, you could retire with full benefits. All full benefits means is that you could pay for your health insurance for the rest of your life and at the discounted rate at what Anheuser-Busch pays. So that was a unique situation because that was a union negotiated thing, and I give them all the credit for that. I was very fortunate for all that to happen. Plus, they were matching their 401k dollar for dollar 6%. And so it was really, you were doubling your money every time you put 6% in. So my wife and I had considered, we were working 12-hour shifts. We were understaffed. So I was working a lot of overtime. A lot of weeks, it was 6 days a week. And it was one of the better paying jobs in the county at that point, even though it was factory work. So I was making more money than I ever had before. So we decided, just with this great situation of a 401k, which was almost a new thing to us. I never made enough money to really put away money in a 401k previously. So we just decided 16%, and that was the maximum at the time. We just put 16% in, and then they changed everything to 8-hour shifts. We brought it back to 6%, and I kept everything it was through Vanguard. It's still in Vanguard because I'm and we can talk about that later, but I'm in Vanguard, and they have a NASDAQ that's indexed to NASDAQ pretty much. So I kept it in there because tech stocks normally do almost better than Dow a lot of times, seemingly at that point. So I just left it there, and I didn't look at it for 10 more years. And then once I started looking at it, then I started playing around with it a little bit, but I'm not going to take any credit for growing just because it grew no matter what you did, except for maybe 2007, 2008. But anyway, that was the situation. Plus, Anheuser-Busch gave us what they called a pension, even though it's not a traditional pension like you would think. It's a pension to where they put $4 an hour for every regular hour you worked into this fund they called a pension. And it was a cash only pension. So at the end of your time there, it's sitting there in cash. And when I retired, I can retire at 55, according to Anheuser-Busch, but I was wondering about that money because normally you can't access that money till you're 59 and a half. Well, the federal government had come out with a plan a while back called the 72T plan, where you can access, as long as you retire from the company that still holds your 401k, you can access, whether it's monthly, quarterly, or yearly, certain money out of that account and without penalty. And so that all just fell into place for me. So like I said, I really don't want to take a lot of credit for this because things were just kind of laid out in front of me, and it was very nice. I'm grateful to God that things were laid out the way they were, because I couldn't have orchestrated this at all. So my wife and I just diligently made sure that was something we always did. We had that set up to where 6% went in, and we left it. And heck, the last 2017, 18, and 19, 16, 17, 18, and 19, the stock market just exploded. And so, of course, when you've got a chunk in there to begin with, when it explodes exponentially and it looks really good, and by the time I hit my 55th birthday, I was right where the goal was, what we had set. And so I figured, I'm going to wait until January because we were going to move. And I decided November 1st was like, I've had it. So I got to go. So that was kind of
fantastic. But what was great about that is that you were at a point where you could say, I can walk away now, because you were very diligent about it. Now, I'm curious because just doing the math in my head. So you started at Anheuser-Busch early 90s, late 80s?
94.
94. Okay, so early 90s. And 401ks, they only came out in the 80s, right? So it was still a fairly new thing, and there was a lot of skepticism behind it, where people were like, we'd rather focus on a standard pension, not this 401k nonsense, whatever. What gave you the confidence to invest in that 401k, especially with the fact that they were matching up to 6% dollar for dollar? That's fantastic. That's actually a great rate. Most companies 4 to 5%. So what was it that made you say, okay, I'm going to go all in on this 401k thing? Because you started off at 16%, right?
Yeah.
And actually, the other piece of this question I want to ask you too is, you were working a lot of overtime when you started there, right? You were talking about that. Was it 6% including your overtime, or was it 6% that they matched of your regular hours?
It was just 6% of the regular hours.
Okay, so they don't match the overtime?
Oh, no. No, I know that sucks. That would have been great. But yeah, I think because of the name Anheuser-Busch, and especially back at the time, maybe not this past year or so, they've tarnished themselves a little bit. But back then, that was a company that everybody had confidence in. And for me to work for a company that I never worked for a company that large, except for a little short period of time I worked for Goodyear. So I had the confidence because they wouldn't be behind something that wasn't stable or that wasn't worthwhile. And for them to, they paid for all of our health insurance. They paid for, we had company parties, 2 or 3 a year. It was fantastic. It was like hitting a gold mine. I thought, what if they're willing to do this for people coming in so they don't go other places, so they don't have the turnover. And it worked. We really didn't have much turnover at all. Maybe 4 or 5 people a year out of 400. It was very low. So anyway, that was the confidence I had, and I really didn't honestly know anything about a 401k or how all that worked, but I did know enough to where there was no internet, not really back then. I didn't have a computer or anything. So yeah, I just had to, I just trusted that was a thing. I'd heard enough about it on the news, I guess. So.
Okay, on.
Yeah.
Now, okay, so besides the 401k, I know that you were doing some other things to really budget and save money. We talked about this a little bit before we hit the record button. So I'm curious, I want to explore what you did there because we were talking about the envelope method before we hit record. And you said that you have a different version of it. And I'd like to hear what that's all about. Because you said a little bit to me before we hit record, but
Yeah.
held back. And I'm glad you did because I want to ask this question now. Because I did something similar. I started with the envelope method, and then I started having a bunch of different bank accounts for the different areas where I needed to put my money for all our different expenses and things that were coming up. So I'm curious, what is this method that you did, Mike?
Let me give you a touch background first. We bought our first house when I was 30 years old, and that was in 1994.
Okay.
And I think our payment was $680 a month. And I was working at Goodyear at the time. And so that first payment that was, I think it was in August of 1994, came due, and we had just moved in the house. We're buying drapes, we're buying all this other kind of stuff, and I didn't have it. And I panicked. Nothing will tighten up a sphincter like not having enough to pay that mortgage. So I went to the bank,
Absolutely.
cash advance on my credit card, and said, I need to get $200 out. And that was enough to get a little bit of groceries and pay enough on the mortgage. But it scared the crap out of me, which is good. But those kind of things should scare the crap out of you, and it'll change your mindset. And that's exactly what it did. So I started trying to do some research on it. I had a friend of mine that was going to a church here in town, different one than I was going to. And he went to a seminar, I think it was on a Sunday night, that was talking about the envelope system. And he was talking to me about it. And by the time, a couple of years later, when I really got serious about it, I did some research on it, and getting money out every day or every week or every 2 weeks or whatever we got paid, and actually physically putting it in an envelope seemed ridiculous to me. And I know that it would definitely work, but I thought, yeah, there's got to be a different way that I can make this work for me because I don't have a lot of time. So what I did is working in Anheuser-Busch, working in a warehouse, being a forklift operator, we have pallets of beer. We have bays of 24 pallets of beer. So if we've got a load, let's say in door 25, and we need 30 pallets of certain Bud Light cans, but there's a bay of that right next to you. So you could actually load it from that bay, but you go to scan the barcode on it and it tells you it's earmarked. So earmarks mean it's out of the system. It's unavailable. You can't touch it. Pretend like it's not there. And I was a trainer at the time. And one day I was like, this makes so much sense. I can make earmarks work for me. So in the budgeting system, what I have is every time I get paid, I put the pay in, and then I have about, I think at the time I might have had 6 or 7 earmarks. I had my mortgage. Let's say that you have your mortgage is $1,000 a month, just for argument's sake. So if you get paid every week, you take $250, you subtract that from the amount in your checkbook register. I bought a book on Amazon. These things are fantastic. They'll last you a couple of years. But you take $250 out and you put $250 in that little line next to where it says mortgage. And then the next month you put $500 in there and you take another $250 out. By the time you get to the end of the month, you've got enough in there for when it comes out, you've got enough. And I do the same with car insurance. I take way too much for car insurance because that way it tricks myself into saving money. So every year or so, I'll have $1,000 extra in that car insurance account or a car insurance earmark that I can use for Christmas or whatever I need to use it for. But I do that for the power, my wife's car payment, cell phone bill. I've got a bunch of them. So I just call those earmarks. So I get paid every month now, but when I was getting paid every week, I just took a quarter of whatever it was every month and just earmarked it out. And that way it worked for me. And so anyway, that's just my version of that. Plus I round up to the next 5. So I do that too.
Yeah, I like that. So I did something similar with the envelope method, but it was with bank accounts, right? I opened up several bank accounts in these for the different accounts that we needed. I had a vet pet account. I had the car maintenance account. It was car payment and car maintenance. So all the money for that would go in there.
Sure.
Our grocery budget, we had a grocery budget, and we would always go over on the grocery budget to make sure that like we would always put extra into it. And at the end
Absolutely.
of the year, same thing, like we would take that money and that was
Yeah.
extra presents and stuff around Christmas time and things like that, which we also had a birthday and holiday fund as well. So we know how much we spend on everybody every single year for the family members for birthdays and all that other stuff. So we would put that amount in, and out of each paycheck, I knew what I had to take out and distribute to all of these accounts every single month.
Yep.
Some months I'd have to pay more into this and less into this. And because at least for the holiday birthday ones, birthdays happen all throughout the year. It's not
Yeah.
just that one time a year. So we would move the funds around as needed with what we had to pay into. It was the same payment every month that we paid into these accounts. It just varied what account it went into when we did
Right.
that. So we knew what we had. And then what was left over was money that we would invest, or at the time for us, it was paying off debt because we did have a lot of debt at that time when we started this. And in doing this method, I was able to pay off over $40,000 in debt in 2 years and save $40,000 before we moved out here to Hawaii when we bought our home out
Fantastic.
here. So it was just like, and this was off of one income. So it was crazy. So yeah, it's definitely possible. And I like how you talked about when you had that first mortgage payment come up and you were like, oh, I don't have it. I'm not ready.
Yeah.
And, you know, that there was a triggering moment for you to change something, and it changed your mindset on how you viewed your finances. So I definitely think that's awesome. So earmarking, it's another way to do what I was doing, but without having all of these accounts. You have to keep a log and keep a register of where your money's going, but really pay attention to your checkbook, which I feel like a lot of people have a problem doing today. Everyone's, oh, I'll just swipe the card and I'll just check my account and see what I've got later,
Right.
instead of planning those purchases and planning everything out. And I think you could really do a lot of damage that way if you would actually just take a step back and plan your spending versus just swiping a card and saying, I'll get to that later.
Yeah.
That's when you put yourself in the danger zone.
Exactly. I think when you were talking about debt, I bounced. I think I did it 3 different times. I'm a little bit hard headed, but at 3 different times I had $10,000 in credit card debt, and I just like, but it depresses you. It's because, well, in your mind you're going, it's not my fault. The refrigerator broke. I had the car was messed up. I needed to do something with it, and that's certainly not your fault. But if you did, because I didn't plan for those kind of things like you were talking about, then yeah, those kind of things will devastate you, and you have no choice but to go to the credit card. That's definitely a different aspect of it, where you really have to make sure that you're prepared for the bad things. You were talking about the how much money you put aside. You put extra. It's like I always put, and I live in Georgia, Northwest Georgia. A lot of things are cheaper here than I know than Hawaii for sure. But here, I think this month I paid $156 for my power bill, which is very low compared to most people that I've talked to. But I earmark $280 a month for my power bill and my water bill. This month it was only, I think both of them combined were 180. So I put $100 into that extra. Right now I've got $1,100 extra in that power water bill, waiting for the rainy day fund type thing. And that way that it's there. But yeah, those kind of things are flexible. So you don't know. I've adjusted that over the years, and you always want too much rather than not enough, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And when I started this system, I was actually back in Virginia. I was stationed in Virginia at the time. And like I already had an idea that I was going to Hawaii in 2 years, but it wasn't official because I couldn't get my official orders till a year out. But I was like, if we're going to be moving to Hawaii, it's going to be a lot more expensive and we're going to have to really be on top of our stuff. So it was like, okay, the debt has to be gone before we move. And that was the goal. And we were able to accomplish that. So I feel like it just goes to show that if you really put the effort into it and you really discipline yourself, there's nothing that you can't accomplish.
Absolutely. And having a partner and having your spouse be on the same page with you means all the difference in the world. I've known so many people that
100%.
it's like their wife or their husband are big spenders and they're always cruising Amazon or Temu or whatever. And it's, man, you can't do that.
Oh
It's
yeah,
just,
Temu is the new dangerous
it
thing.
is. It's
Oh
part of the
man, it was
CCP, man. You gotta be
Amazon and then they
careful
had
too.
Wish, right? The
Yeah.
wish.com thing, and then it went back to Amazon, and now it's Amazon and Temu. And I'm like, gotta
Wish
stay
kind
away
of
from
went
that
away
stuff.
when all the tariffs started going on the Chinese goods coming in, and then they found a way around it with Temu being based in Boston. I think is how they've done that. So it's like there's always a workaround. But
Yeah,
yeah,
I feel like it's basically wish.com all over again,
that's
but
what
it's,
it looks that
they're
way,
based
doesn't
in
it?
the US.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely.
Yeah, so let's actually talk about that a little bit more about being on the same page as your partner, right? Because I feel a lot of people when they approach their finances, they look at it from a personal perspective and not a team perspective. And I know that when my wife and I decided to do what we did to pay off all of our debt, this was something we both had to 100% agree on, not 80%, 20%, not "Oh, I'll meet you halfway." It was like, no, this is all or nothing. Like we all need to have the same mindset when it comes to what we're going to do with our finances. So could you share a little bit more on that or elaborate a little bit more on like how or different ways somebody could talk to their partner to get them on the same page when it comes to their finances?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I know that my wife and I
I think it's
both.
the age old question right there.
Yeah, I think so. We grew up with probably lower middle class type surroundings. I think she was worse off than I was. I think that growing up in that situation and going to work as soon as you're able to and mowing. I grew up in Florida, so I was mowing grass at 12 years old, and I was just always doing something to make a little bit of money. Not necessarily, I wasn't Mr. Diligent saying, "Oh, here, mom and dad, here's the money I made today." It wasn't anything like that. It was like, yeah, I just wanted my own money and just in that era that we were in. So I think both of us had the same mindset that, we both, neither one of us wanted to work until we died. We've all had family members. We both have had family members that have either just retired and died or died at 55, taking a nap, having a heart attack. And so we've all had those examples, negative or positive, to where that hasn't worked. And for me, in my personality, I think my wife is the same way, is that we learn more from watching people, I don't want to say fail, but screw things up and sort of, ooh, I don't want to do that. And whatever it is, it could be relationally, it could be whatever. But we've just had this whole thing. She was like, you make a lot more money than I do now when I started with Anheuser-Busch, and you need to, do your part, even though I'm going to be riding on that part eventually. And she does. But we always look at the things as 50-50. She did her part, even though on paper it was a smaller part. We didn't try to look at it that way. We looked at it as, this is our team effort. We are the Tarnos, and we're not Mike and Barbara. We're more the Tarnos. And I think that having that cohesive attitude towards it made a big difference.
Yeah, yeah. Actually going into it as one instead of two separate partners, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, yeah, I definitely think that's huge. Okay, so Mike, now besides what you did with your 401k to get to retirement at 55, and then also the way that you earmark your funds, I know that you also do voiceover stuff as well. So is that kind of like a little side hustle that you have going on?
Yeah, I started in 2012. I was working with a guy that we were on night shift. I worked night shift for many years, 14 years straight. I worked night shift. It was awful. But anyway, we would have magazines and we would be reading an article on our breaks. And one article was about Gilbert Gottfried losing his job as the Aflac duck because he made some kind of inappropriate joke. The Japanese people that ran the company basically didn't appreciate it and they fired him. He was making six figures by doing the Aflac duck voice. And I thought, that sounds great. So we both decided we were going to audition for the Aflac Duck. They put that as an open audition for the whole country. And neither one of us ever did, but it got me reading about it and thinking, I've always read back commercials to the radio when I was a kid. And, I've always just been enamored with the radio and DJs. And I was a DJ at one point, and it's just been a burning love inside of me my whole life. So anyway, in 2012, I bought some equipment and I practiced all through that year. And I finally got my first job in December of that year. I was an off-camera chef talking about how I liked my kitchen. And it was for a kitchen remodeling company in Munich, Germany. And ever since then, my voice has found the niche that I'm supposed to be doing, I think. And a lot of it is radio imaging, which a lot of people don't know what that is. But in radio stations, you have the voice that comes on that's not the DJ. This is John Boy and Billy in the morning, classic rock all day. So you've got that voice.
Yeah, yeah.
This thing. So I do a lot of
Kind
stuff.
of like what I have for my intro for my podcast.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
It's very good. I was going to offer my services to you, but you don't need me. But I do a lot of stuff in Great Britain. I have a great producer, Paul, that I work with over there several times a week. He has different people that need intros. I've done voice of one of my more recent ones is a bluegrass station here in the U.S. So I don't sound like a bluegrass guy, but the guy loves me. We were actually chatting on Facebook yesterday. He says, and everybody loves what you do. And I love hearing that stuff. So anyway, I do that and I do commercials. I've done commercials for the Canary Islands, all through Europe, Thailand, Africa. It's been a fantastic ride. I'm not rolling in cash over it. I'm a middle tier guy. I'm not the Don LaFontaine or Mike Rowe or anything. I'm happy with what I do. I don't want to be too busy either. I enjoy doing it. I've got a good setup for my career, and it'll keep me busy, keep me out of my wife's hair most days.
Yeah, no, that's great. So do you actually do the voice acting from your own home, or do you have a studio that you go to?
This is a studio where I'm talking to you right now from. Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great. What a great, side hustle that you have as well, right?
Yeah.
And actually, maybe not so much a side hustle now since you're retired and it's maybe like your main gig, right?
Yeah, like I said, I know there are so many times where I need to go put myself out there more and get on more rosters and be busier. But I've got grass to cut. I've got stuff to do, man. I don't want to be a slave to my desk in here either. Some days I'm in here 4 hours. Some days I'm not in here at all. But yeah, it's fantastic. I love it. It's just fun. It's very simple. I did do a radio show during the pandemic, as a matter of fact. It was in a radio station in Great Britain. I was the only American on there. It was just called Rockin' in the USA, and it was a 2-hour 70s and 80s music radio show, and it was fun.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Congrats on all your success there. That's fantastic. And one of the reasons why I want to point this out too is I know that you've also had some hardships in life, right? And it goes to show that if you're persistent and you never give up, you can go out there and crush it in anything. But I'd like to touch on this a little bit, right? Because it's part of your story and it's part of who you are. But this was last year, right? When you found out that you had something going on. So if you could share that with us and let the audience know if you're comfortable with that.
Sure. No problem. In April of last year, I've been on, let me back up a little bit. I've been on proton pump inhibitors for about 25 years now, maybe a little bit longer, but all that is like an omeprazole, the Prilosec, Prevacid type things. So I've been taking that every day for a long time, and you still get heartburn once in a while. And one night back in April of last year, I had a particularly struggle with the heartburn. So I was in the recliner with the cat, and I was sleeping out there until about 3 a.m. and I felt better and I went to bed. And because when you lay flat, it's just not a good thing. I went to bed, and the next morning I got up and my wife was sleeping in a little bit. I went in to take a shower, and I'm in the shower and I'm feeling weird. And I thought, what is going on? I got out of the shower and everything's spinning. So I'm thinking they're not going to find me naked. So I went over and I got underwear and a t-shirt on, and I passed out. And I've not passed out in my entire life. And I was only out for about 10 seconds. It wasn't a huge deal, but I thought, this is concerning. So of course my wife hears the big thud, the 215-pound guy hitting the floor in the bathroom. She woke up to that. So she was like on me for a while. I went to the doctor. He said, sounds like you might have a bleeding ulcer, because there were other symptoms that caused them to believe that I had internal bleeding. My hemoglobin was down to 7, which is normally between 11 and 14. So I was bleeding internally. They thought it was a bleeding ulcer. I went to have an upper GI done, which he said, I've had a few of those done before, because when you have chronic heartburn, they want to make sure that your Barrett's esophagus is not out of control. So anyway, he went down there. He was, I can fix that if I see the bleeding ulcer. And so he came back after they put me in recovery. He says, I've been doing this a long time, and I believe you did not have a bleeding ulcer. I believe I've seen you have a massive cancer above where your stomach is. Okay. So they did a biopsy. They called me back, said, yeah, it's cancer. So I went through the chemo and radiation for that, 6 rounds of chemo, 28 rounds of radiation. And it struck me hard there at the end. I had lost about 35 pounds, which was good. I needed to lose a little bit of weight. It was a very expensive weight loss program. It was, and so far I've only put back 20 of all that, which is good. I didn't want to be over 200 anymore anyway. So we went to go have the surgery done. With surgery, is very brutal. They take your esophagus out, they move your stomach up into your chest. You struggle to get nutrition a lot of your life, and most people have just a hard time with it. But the doctor that I had was far superior than anybody I have read about. We did a lot of research, and there was a lot of horror stories, but this guy was like, he was a superstar. He had actually come out with different ways of doing this procedure, and he was fantastic. He was a superstar. So we're at the hotel across the street from Emory Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, and we get a phone call at 6:30 at night. Surgery was the next morning, and they said that your surgery is canceled and the doctor is clearing a schedule for the foreseeable future. Couldn't tell me why. Just said, you're done. And I just paid $174 for this hotel room. What are you talking about? I'm a stingy guy. This sucks. Anyway, so we found out later that his son had issues. And so anyway, I decided to forego the surgery and just didn't have it. It did, voiceover wise, it actually took me out of the game for a while, even though this is a freebie for you folks out there. That if they tell you it's targeted radiation, which my targeted radiation is right down at the bottom of my sternum, or just above the bottom of my sternum, and it was near our heart. So my heart. And so one of the things we asked the doctor immediately is this going to affect my heart, my lungs, all the other semi-important things that are in there? And he says, it's targeted. It's not going to bother that stuff at all. It's like, okay, it was state-of-the-art equipment. So I think it was right at the 20th radiation mark, they turn up the radiation a little bit. So it's like almost immediately I could feel the difference when they turned up the radiation, kind of finish you off right there at the end. But it was like I lost my voice. And I'm still getting work. I might not be feeling so good, but I'm still doing work. You can act. It's called voice acting for a reason. So anyway, I was over there, and you want to get the scoop on things. You talk to the techs that you talk to every day that deal with you. And I was like, I'm losing my voice. And the one girl that I talk to all the time, she goes, oh yeah, that's us. But my vocal cords are quite a distance from the targeted radiation. She goes, that's the radiation. Okay, so it's not as targeted as they sell it to be. So I lost my voice for about a month and a half, and it finally, I was afraid it wasn't going to come back the way it was, but it finally came back. It was very weak at first, but it was better. So anyway, I had promised my wife to get a scan at the end of summer. So because I haven't had a scan since September of last year. So as soon as we find out that I'm in the clear, then she'll leave me alone. She promises.
All right. Yeah. Listen to the wife, man.
Yes.
We're all pulling for you. Yeah. I wanted you to share that because the whole time I talked to you, even before we hit record, you just seem like a very positive guy, right? That you haven't let anything in life get you down. And by being that way, you were able to be successful in everything that you do. I think that's important for my listeners to hear, that you can really get some of the worst, most terrible news, but you made something out of it. And I just want to say thank you for sharing that with us, because I know that's not easy to share. But also, man, here you are, you're back, right? You got your voice back and you're continuing to do your voice acting. You didn't let that hold you down. You didn't let that stop you. You could have easily said, I don't know if I could do this anymore, and given up. But you didn't.
I was hoping it was going to come back. I'd try to keep myself relatively in decent health. I'd take my vitamins every day and the whole thing, but I'd try to exercise. And I guess for 59, I'm not doing too bad, but I have to give God all the credit for this, because like for me to not be, I really think not being afraid of being on the planet anymore. I don't know if I said that correctly, but my faith drives my life 100%. So if I'm not on this planet anymore, I'm doing better. And not that I'm wanting to accelerate that timeline, but I'm okay. But yeah, I agree. I think having a positive attitude does help. I think that my wife stood by me. She went to every radiation appointment. It was 3:00 in the afternoon, every afternoon. And she went with me every day. And all she did was just sit in the waiting room, waiting for me to go through my 10-minute radiation process. But I do think I attribute part of that to her, because she was such a big part of that. We celebrate 34 years in September. And for
Awesome.
her to still like me, I think is a fantastic thing. I don't think that happens too often anymore. But yeah, you got to enjoy, you got to still laugh. I was talking to a guy that I worked with a while back in 2005. And we were talking off the air. I had lost my dad in high school from cancer. And I think that when you deal with death early on in your life, he actually took me to see my aunt who died on the kitchen floor when I was probably about 7 or 8 years old too. And I remember seeing that going, why did he bring me? Even I tell people now, is like, why in the world did he bring you? And I think that part of that is you have to understand that life is not puppy dogs and unicorns. And you have to understand that the sucky parts are just as important or just as prevalent in your life as the good parts. So yeah, you need to focus on the good, but dealing with the bad. I've known so many people that cannot deal with the bad at all. Anytime there's a death in the family or whatever, they collapse. And man, how does that work? I just never felt like that was an option for me. And I think that that was part of when things suck, and they're always going to say things are going well now. Eventually they're going to suck.
Yeah.
And you just have to. In 2005, I went to have coffee with my mother and I found she had died the night before on the couch. So it's like one of those things that a friend of mine at work, he saw me after my 3 days of bereavement and he goes, I just don't know if I could deal with that. What are you going to do? I sat on the curb and I called, this is another way God took care of me. I sat on the curb and I called 911 and a guy the reason I live in Cartersville, Georgia is because of this guy that I was stationed with at Pope Air Force Base. He ended up working at 911. I hadn't even thought about it in a while, but guess who answered the phone when I called 911? My buddy, Jesse. So it's like at that point, you needed a friend or a friendly voice, somebody that knew you, somebody that knew my mother to answer the phone. And that's exactly what I got. So it's hard to say that life's been unfair. Life is life. So just
Yeah, no, I
enjoy.
like that. Life is life.
Mm.
Life isn't fair, right?
Yep.
But it is what it is. And you got to make the best of it no matter where you are in life, right? And no matter what station you're at in life. So yeah, definitely appreciate that perspective. Mike, I want to go ahead and transition this into something now that I call the final round. It's where I'm going to ask you the same 4 questions I ask everybody that comes on the show, and it gives us a good idea of how you are under a little bit of pressure, which I'm sure you're going to crush it. So if you're
I
ready
don't
to
know
go,
about all that.
we'll get that party started.
All right.
All right, here we go. So, Mike, the first question of the final round is, what's the biggest mistake you've ever made when it comes to your finances, investing, real estate, or just business in general?
Not having a plan. I think when I got married, I just always floated through life as being a single guy, and I didn't have a plan for finances. I didn't have a plan for when we were going to buy a house. I had no plans. Now I have a plan for just about everything. So I think not having a plan, it set me back a few.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's one thing that could really slow you up a little bit. But all right, so the next question, Mike, these all kind of tie into each other. But what is something that you've learned that you wish you knew when you first got started?
Let's see that when I was younger, I was always trying to find the wrong girl. I think that was a lot of it. So I was trying to find somebody that was. I always shot for somebody that was out of my league, but and I still did that with my wife. I always say I outkicked my punt coverage, but I think that a lot of that is she is a huge part of everything I've become. So I think that yeah, I wish I had known that she was going to be there for me, and I knew that I wasn't going to be alone or a failure. Failure's temporary anyway. So just knowing that I had her by my side was good.
That's great. That's great. All right. So, next question. Do you have any tips or tricks that you would recommend to someone that is just getting started out today?
Yeah. I think that sit down and write down all your bills for the month. Just that's probably one of the first things you can do. Sit down, write out all the bills that you have, whether you look at your checking account or you look at your check register, which most people don't have. But if you don't have a check register, that would be number one. This is number two. Sit down, write everything out, and figure out how much you need to budget for those things every month. And that's a good starting point. And at least you have a tangible thing to look at every month. Is that this is coming up on the 7th. I know when my power bill comes in, I know when my water bill comes in, I know the date. So it's as long as you are prepared for whatever happens during that month, the regular bills, for groceries, clip those coupons. Don't be afraid of clipping coupons. If you go to Kroger, clip the online coupons and round up. That's one of the big things for me. I think you round up the next 5 and I saved $800 that first year just by rounding up the next 5 with every purchase. So
That's great. Yeah, that's awesome. It's amazing how much you could save in a year when you're not paying attention to those little things like that. But it's also amazing how much you can lose in a year if you're not paying attention to some of the things that you're spending. So I
Don't
think
be
that
that
that's a great
person.
point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
don't be that person that says, "Oh, I have money. Look at my app. I've got $400 left."
And then you forgot about the thing you swiped earlier, and then you're like, oh, why is it getting declined? Because
Yeah,
that thing you
exactly.
swiped earlier just came out.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Definitely, Mike. Appreciate that. Okay, final question of the final round. And this is an opinion-based question. And I will preface this with besides your own, do you have a favorite business, investing, or real estate related book or podcast or both?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. There's a financial guy here in Atlanta. His name is Wes Moss, and he has a book out called You Can Retire Sooner Than You Think. And he has a radio show on WSB here in Atlanta. It's every Sunday morning, I think at 9 o'clock, or maybe it was before that, but I used to listen to him if I worked Saturday nights. But I bought his book, and he's got really good practical advice on how to budget your money and how to prepare for that retirement phase of your life. And it certainly did help me. And he's just a practical guy. He's not one of these huge speakers that travels around the country and has this big ego. He's a good guy. He's just down to earth and has some practical advice for you. So You Can Retire Sooner Than You Think by Wes Moss.
Awesome. Great recommendation. I wrote that one down. It's getting added to the list. Definitely
Yeah.
appreciate that. Okay, Mike, that is it for the final round. Definitely appreciate you being a participant there. You crushed it. So actually, that may be the final round, but I do have one more question for you. And this is probably the most important question of this entire podcast, because for my guests that have been listening right now, that have been listening to your story, and they're just like, man, Mike's been through the ringer, but he got out there and he made it happen. And I want to know more about Mike and what he's doing. I want to know about his podcast so I can go listen to it. So where can people find more information about you? You have a website you can share with us, social media, your podcast, all that good stuff.
Yeah, thankfully my name is very unique. There's not a whole lot of Mike Tarnows. I think the other Mike Tarno that I know is in Berlin. So yeah, mine is, if you just search my name, Tarnow, Mike Tarno, and I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I'm not a big TikToker. I do have an account, but I don't hardly ever use it. And my voiceover website is miketarnow.com, MikeTarnow.com. And then my podcast, it's called Stay Off My Lawn. I co-host it with a friend of mine, Richard Durrington. He can be found at richarddurrington.com, which he's a great guy. He's got a very unique voice. He's also a voice actor. So if you need somebody with a real folksy, very unique voice, somebody a little more standard, you come to me. But yeah, stayoffmylawn.us. You can find us there, and you can find out all about the podcast. We kind of look at the news of the day. It's a little political. We make fun of everybody, whether you have a D or an R next to your name, because basically politicians are the funniest people on the planet right now because they say such stupid things. So we have a good time with that. So we laugh a lot.
Awesome. Appreciate that. All right. So, hey, I'll make sure I have all those links in the show notes to make it easy for people to follow and go check it out. I just ask, if you're driving right now, please wait till you get somewhere where you can copy and paste it or click safely. So, Mike, this has been awesome. Do you have any final thoughts for our listeners?
Oh my goodness. When things look bleak, like I said earlier, I've been in $10,000 plus credit card debt 3 different occasions. And if you're in that situation right now, yeah, it looks bleak, but sit down and make a plan. I can't emphasize enough to take that 30,000-foot view of things, zoom out a little bit and go, okay, it's not going to be that bad. We need to figure out how to make this work and how to move forward, because you can't change the past. So
I love that. I love that. You can't change the past. Make the best of what you have right now and today. So, yeah, what a great message, Mike. Definitely appreciate that. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. This was fantastic.
oh, great. I had a great time.
Yeah, absolutely. And hey, I also want to thank all of my listeners for joining me and our special guest, Mike Tarno, on the Average Joe Finances podcast. Go leave us a 5-star review and tell us what you liked about today's episode with Mike. Aloha from Hawaii, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you for making it to the end of this episode. Greatly appreciate you being here with me today on the Average Joe Finances podcast. If you haven't done so yet, make this the episode that you go leave us a 5-star rating or subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Average Joe Finances podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Have an outstanding day.